Welcome to this week's edition of Talk Back. I'm one of your hosts, Eric Nesbit, and with me as always is Justin Gay, your host and director of content. Once again, the NFL is king here on episode 305 of Talk Back, and that's because there are huge breaking stories. Now, I don't mean breaking news in terms of you're just hearing about it now. I'm talking about quarterbacks breaking down. Segment 1 is going to be all about some of the big injuries to quarterbacks we've talked about in the past, Nick Foles going down, and now we have several other quarterbacks nursing major injuries, one of them out for the season. How much does that change for that franchise moving forward? Then when we move on to segment 2, it's talk-worthy time. We've got more quarterback news. The New York Giants are dealing with the situation, benching their longtime starter. Cam Newton is looking a little rough around the edges for the Panthers. And what is the relationship for Aaron Rodgers and Matt LaFleur? But there are other pieces of news within the NFL that we need to talk about too. Jalen Ramsey is reportedly very unhappy in Jacksonville, not to mention just about the entire roster in Miami wanting to leave. Who is the biggest surprise so far after 2 weeks in the NFL? And what are the biggest matchups coming up here in the next week? We've got all of that and more on this edition of Talk Back. Are you ready for a show that talks sports from the fans' point of view?
We've seen Michael Jordan score 37 points a game in his era. How many could he score in today's NBA?
There's not a player out there who I'd rather have than LeBron James.
Are you ready for a show that isn't afraid to challenge anyone when it comes to sports? If Adam Silver really wanted to fix tanking in the NBA, he would stop rewarding teams by giving them the best chance to win the draft lottery.
I mean, how many times will Roger Goodell drop the ball on handling domestic violence in the NFL?
Look, athletes have every right to talk politics, but if the fans stop tuning in, that's their right.
Then you're ready for Talk Back, a podcast where two fans debate the media narrative and discuss the world of sports as we see it.
Welcome to the show. We are back. Time to talk a little week 2 NFL action. Eric, week 1, we talked about what happened at Gillette Stadium as the Steelers went in and they got thumped. And Ben Roethlisberger took a lot of the blame after that game for the performance of the Steelers. He was awful in that game, 27 of 47. We talked about the inaccuracies that he had in that game. Didn't seem like the Ben that we had grown accustomed to over the years, that a quarterback typically pretty accurate. Guy was not accurate on Sunday in week 2 either, Eric, for Seattle. And we got a glimpse as to why he's been so inaccurate. Something in his elbow let go, and Ben Roethlisberger is done for the season. He will have elbow surgery. So, Eric, there is a lot of question marks now on this Steelers team, and there's a lot more after the move that they made on Monday night, but they'll turn to Mason Rudolph. So before we get to the Steelers' outlook of if they have any chance in the AFC to make a run at the playoffs, what do you think this means for Ben Roethlisberger's future, especially at the age that he's at now?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest story coming out of this. We've talked about on this podcast over the last couple of years, specifically the last year, 12 months to 16 months in general, that Ben has been kind of flip-flopping about whether or not he's going to retire. Sometimes when the going got tough with AB and Le'Veon Bell and, of course, the whole national anthem thing, it just seemed like the team was disjointed and they didn't have their leader. And his mind was sometimes other places. And he talked about whether or not he was going to stay in the league. Then he signs a, I believe, 3-year deal, 3-year extension, seems to be recommitted. And lo and behold, he goes out and in week 2 gets a significant elbow injury. And now with the surgery, he's shut down on season ending IR. That's a humongous hit, as you said, for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So moving forward, I think it's a bit too early for us to make a call on what this really means big picture, but we're in the business of podcasting and giving opinions and pontificating on what we think might happen. And I got to be honest, this rehab is going to be critical because if it doesn't go well, or there's any lingering stress on this elbow, as much as he says he's committing to the deal that he signed, I'd have to believe that therapy and all of the work that you've got to do to come back from injury at that age is going to put a strain on his mentality. And he will find out in the next 6 to 8 months whether he really does want to come back and play football.
Well, he's already flip-flopping because remember when they initially drafted Mason Rudolph, how he threw a tantrum like a 3-year-old, and I'm not helping him. How dare they ask me to do that? And now it's like, oh, I want to be part of this. I want to be a mentor for him. I want to do everything I can. So I don't think you can take anything that Ben says right now with any grain of salt. Yeah, he wants to honor his 3-year deal, but at his age, if rehab doesn't go well, we already seen Andrew Luck walk away from the game with a shoulder injury. We're seeing a lot of these other quarterbacks. I mean, even when we get to the next quarterback who got hurt on Sunday with Drew Brees and his age, how he just hasn't looked like the same guy since about the middle of last season. So just because Ben's committed doesn't mean that his body is going to respond to this. We see pitchers all the time that have issues that it takes them a long time to come back. Ben could lose this season and what? Part of next season? Is he really going to try to come back at 38, turning 39 potentially? I just think there's a lot of questions there. So when people say, oh, he'll definitely be back or, oh, he's not, I think to your point, it's a wait and see process, but I don't take anything that Ben says right now and hold it with any type of value because we've seen this before. He has a bad performance. He wants to retire. Then he signs a 3-year deal. He doesn't want to mentor Mason Rudolph. Now he wants to be part of this. I don't think you can take this guy. He flip-flops all the time, Eric. I really at this point don't know what to think about them because they've looked awful. They just haven't been a very good team. I mean, they got annihilated in week 1 and they didn't look that great versus Seattle at times. And then they bring Mason Rudolph in. And he didn't look that bad. Got 2 touchdown passes, did have the pick. So this is a team now, when you start to look at the AFC picture, it's not that easy. The Ravens in their own division have looked really good, although their competition has probably been below standard. The Browns got gifted a Jets team that lost everybody. I think you probably got a text message at some point in the second quarter if you wanted to go up to MetLife and hold the clipboard in case Luke Falk got hurt. Even Mike Leach didn't know he was in the NFL. So I don't even know how good that team is, but that 6th spot, that wild card spot probably is still open. So with Mason Rudolph, the starter for the rest of the year, do you have any faith that Pittsburgh can make a playoff run? Because unlike what we talked about, you and I offline, that maybe it was a chance to sort of reset this team, get a high draft pick. That's not the way that the Steelers are going. They think that Mason Rudolph can have an impactful year for him, but do you think that he can?
This is the quarterback league, right? This is, you just don't know from week to week what you're going to get. And so you have to have a bit of a sample size. Mason Rudolph might go the Aaron Rodgers route. Now, I'm not saying he's going to become Aaron Rodgers, but he's now sat behind Ben for 2 years, and he was a good draft pick out of Oklahoma State. The kid has talent. It's not like he's a bad quarterback. So if he comes in this year and really shows up and shows that, okay, I've developed as a backup for a couple of years and now I'm capable of being a starter. Now we've got other questions. And I want to go back to something you said that really I think people need to take note of is that the age of some of these quarterbacks, there is no precedent for whether or not they can come back from this kind of thing. When we're talking about Drew Brees, which we'll talk about in a minute, when we're talking about Ben Roethlisberger, there's no precedent for whether or not a nearly 40-year-old quarterback, or over 40 in Drew Brees' case, can come back from an injury. So Ben can say all the right things. And again, I talked about physical therapy. I talked about whether or not his drive will still be there. There's a third factor in this, and that's whether or not he even has velocity on the football to play at the NFL level after this. That is yet to be determined and won't be determined for a long time, possibly into the beginning of next year, like you said. So if you're the Steelers, do they just give in now? I mean, Baltimore's 2-0, Cleveland's 1-1, but they really should be better than that. They should be 2-0 in my opinion. So now Pittsburgh's 0-2. Is it a lost year? I don't think they make the playoffs, Justin, unless Mason Rudolph really shows up. There's some questions about James Conner. There's some questions about whether he's not even healthy right now. So I think the Steelers have to get through these next 4 or 5 weeks, look at what their record is, and then determine a strategy going into the draft for next year. There's a lot of QB talent also in the draft for next year. A lot of moving pieces here, Justin. But if Mason Rudolph shows up this year, he's now prepared. He's now maybe the quarterback that they drafted and they need. Whether or not Ben wants to play, if he loses any velocity on that football next year or the year after, I think he's done anyway. So there's a lot of moving pieces here for the Steelers.
That's where I had the biggest problem with what they did on Monday night when they traded their first round pick in the 2020 draft for Minkah Fitzpatrick. You're 0-2 right now. And when you look at the playoff picture, okay, I think the Bills are 2-0. They're going to come back to the pack. I think the Browns look very beatable week in, week out. I don't think they, at this point right now, 2 weeks into the season, are the team we thought they were going to come out of the gate as. The AFC South is a complete disaster. You never know what you're going to get week in, week out from these teams. It seems like the first team to 8-8 may get that division. And then you have the Chiefs and the Chargers. So that's why I think maybe there's an outside chance that that wild card spot, maybe that's what Pittsburgh's looking at. But you have an unproven quarterback that you really haven't played outside of preseason games. And you've pushed all your chips into the table on this year by getting, yes, a very good player for your secondary, but you have no idea offensively if it's even going to matter. This team could be in a position where they could have a pick in the top 10, and now it's gone. It's Miami's pick for a secondary player. You might have Mason Rudolph that comes out this year and in 14 games looks awful, and Ben can't make it back, and now all of a sudden you have a ton of questions at the quarterback position where you could have addressed that in the draft. So now you're going to be back in the position that you were. You're either trading picks in 2021 to get into the first round of 2020, and that's going to hurt you again, or you're going to have to take a quarterback in round 2 or later. I thought what they did, Eric, just made no sense. Even if you're talking to Miami and you have the parameters of this deal, once Ben gets hurt, you got to pull out of that deal and at least assess where you're going and what your future is. If Mason Rudolph's not the guy, you can't trade the first round pick that you have the ability to go get someone. That was just a terrible move. I completely disagree with it. You already lost a year on a rookie deal with Fitzpatrick. He wants to play in the slot and the safety, and they need help at corner. I don't even know if it's a good fit or not for this team.
Yeah, that's one of the questions I had is he's unhappy in Miami, and now he's coming to an 0-2 team. Sure, it's the storied Pittsburgh Steelers, and they traditionally are a good team. I don't think Mike Tomlin has even ever had a losing record, but this year could be gone. I mean, this year could be at a big loss. So what's it being a stopgap for right now?
I have no idea. And when you and I heard the news on Monday, we went back and forth on text of, okay, do they start to look now at the future? Is this a year where it's like, okay, we just turn the keys over to Mason Rudolph with what we have and we just ride it out and see how good he is, and then we can assess the quarterback position in the draft? And they completely blew that up by Monday night when they made the trade. I just couldn't believe that. And from Miami's point of view, they were probably the best team to trade Fitzpatrick to, because they have the best chance of not winning and having the worst draft pick. Everybody else, if you start talking about Seattle or Philly or even Kansas City, some of the teams that were getting thrown out, you're talking about teams that have a chance at the playoffs and to make a run. That means your first round picks into the 20s. Pittsburgh has a chance that they could get another top 10 pick out of this. So for Miami's standpoint, if you're going to get rid of the guy, if he doesn't want to be there, they made the best move of this, which is hard to say because they've done nothing else right. But I just thought, Eric, it was just a complete, I couldn't believe the move when I heard it, that they were the team that made this move. It got announced Monday night during the Monday night game when you knew Ben was already out for the year, and then they go do this move. That made absolutely no sense to me.
And look, I know this isn't fantasy football and we'd love to play virtual GM here, but at the very least, why not try to get Josh Rosen? I mean, the guy is a former first round high pick, right? Why not try to get Josh Rosen and Minkah Fitzpatrick? Maybe throw in a pick and a player or a couple other pieces. If you want to go and lose your first round pick for a person that's going to play in the secondary, why not try to sweeten the deal and at least get a quarterback that, is a former first rounder? I know, we're playing with ideas. Really, we're just playing with virtual paper at that point, but I don't understand what they're doing. I really don't. And again, maybe they think this season's salvageable. Maybe they've seen something in practice with Mason Rudolph that we haven't seen yet because he's been hidden behind the scenes. Either way, they're in a deep hole in this division at 0-2. And I've got to think that it's going to be an upward climb now. And to your point about the AFC, the conference as a whole, if you're the Steelers, in my mind, you're looking at the Chargers and the Colts as your competition. Let me explain why. I think the Texans ultimately rise and have enough pieces now with the mess that we see in that division. I think the Texans are still probably a leg up on everybody else, but I think Jacoby Brissett will do enough that team will be in the wild card conversation. And then the same goes in the AFC West. And I don't mean to talk negatively about your Broncos, but look, I mean, them and the Raiders, they're just not there right now. And so the Chargers and the Chiefs, assuming the Chiefs win that division, the Chargers are your second